Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to All Beer Inside quarantine editions of the episode. Joining me this evening, we have author, blogger, teacher, and podcast host, Jordan St. John.
Hi there. Good to be anywhere.
Thank you very much for taking time out of what I can only assume is an extremely busy schedule to speak with me today.
It's kind of a weird one in the sense that I teach at George Brown College, and we're trying to put all the classes online. And I'm in charge of the beer certificate, which means I've been transitioning material from in-person to online. And then we have to film things. And at the beginning of this process, the second and third classes, the one that's grain to glass, where we learn where all the flavors come from, off flavors, that stuff, and the beer and food pairing course. At the beginning of January, I had a little third-party COVID scare. There was somebody who was like a friend of a friend had COVID, and they were out walking in a socially distanced manner. So they had to be tested, and I had to call the school and bump filming a week because there was no way we were going to get a test back in time for Friday when we were going to do the thing.
Yeah.
That sucked. And it was just like, all right, I'm going to stay in my apartment 6 days a week, except for Fridays where I'm going to take an Uber to the school. And we're going to get this thing done on time, under budget. It's going to work out. So it's been very focused, but it's like, at the same time, I played a lot of Dragon Age Inquisition. It was very, very boring.
Oh, hey, you got some free time to do some stuff, and that's what really matters in all of it. Now, like I mentioned pre-show, we normally share a virtual beer. However, you're taking the night off beer, which is completely understandable. You know, we all take our nights off. So you're enjoying a lovely green tea.
Yeah, it's not even a good green tea.
Okay.
I could really have gotten like better tea to show some deference to the program. But it is Tetley green tea.
Oh, okay. So it's
on sale.
So one of the big guys. I have, unfortunately, from our Toronto episodes, my last Toronto beer from Godspeed, Taru. It's a 8.8% barrel-aged imperial stout. First time I've ever had it, and I understand the guy from Godspeed was actually originally a Montrealer, which is awesome to hear. So,
oh yeah, he was like, I think he did a lot of recipe development at JDCL back in the day.
Very
he
cool.
might be responsible for Péché Mortel, although don't tell JF I said that.
Got it. Okay, well, we can still do a virtual toast, even though you're enjoying some tea. So, a toast.
Yeah. You can really taste the cheapness.
Lovely. The cheap green tasting. Yes, I mean, just from the sound of it, you do have a slightly higher elevated taste buds than I do, where I'm just like, it tastes like chocolate and coffee, where you probably can pick the bean from a certain region and things like that.
I don't know about that, but I mean, we did, I worked last year very briefly for an AI company called Taste Guru. And what we ended up doing was, I guess maybe it was 2 years ago now. Time's kind of in flux, you know how it is. We tasted 500 beers blind in order to put together like an algorithm so you could recommend beer to people. And I got to the point where I realized that I was tasting 100% barley beers versus barley and rice, barley and corn with 100% accuracy.
Wow.
I picked Radaburger Pilsner out of a 500 beer lineup, for God's sake. I don't know. I think more practice makes perfect, right?
Yeah, for sure. So as I ask everyone, I already read the About Us, but for my viewers, where did the beer journey all begin?
Well, I was working for a publishing company on Dundonald Street in Toronto. And it's a really good publishing company. They do labor law stuff. They are still extant. Like they're headed up by a guy who's a fabulous lawyer. And I hate to say it, but not a great publisher. I think in life you only get so many gifts. And over time, what happened, I mean, it was because it's a labor law publishing company, it's a union shop, despite the fact it probably didn't need to be one. So people kept leaving, and through attrition, I was like the lowest man on the totem pole, and I was doing all of the basic administrative work.
Okay.
Like I was doing managerial level reporting and stuff. I was making not very much money, and I was very unhappy about it. And down the street from there is Bar Volo, which was the best beer bar in Toronto. So it was about 2006 or 7, and I started spending more and more time at the bar after work than I spent at the office. You know, things kind of snowballed. At the same time, Niagara College was starting to think about opening. So I thought, maybe I could pitch this in. I'm only 27. I don't have to do this for a living. I could go be a brewer. I wanted to get into brewing school. The first year there were like 500 applicants. The second year there were 1,000.
Yeah.
So I thought I need something in a portfolio that'll allow me to get into brewing school. So I decided to start a blog. By the time I had been writing about beer for 6 months, I was the national beer columnist for Sun Media. Because I had an English degree and I could write a little. But, I got into brewing school after that. And then suddenly you've got like a national beer critic attending brewing school with brewers. It's weird. Mm-hmm. So I didn't quite make it through there. The head of the brewing school at Niagara said, "You like to write books." I like to write a book. He said, "Go away." He didn't actually say go away, but go and write this thing, which I did. And I've written about 5 books since then. I've got a blog called St. John's Wort, which I continue to update despite the fact that I think that nobody actually reads anything anymore. We've got a podcast, the Ontario Craft Beer Guide, the podcast. It's very popular. I get to be on television periodically, which is always entertaining. I think I won The Agenda with Steve Bacon, which is not a show you're supposed to be able to win. It's not a game show, But yeah, it's all been really interesting. Eventually, I drank so much beer they gave me a school of my own. So that's something.
Very cool. Yeah. I remember looking when I first started getting to craft beer, because when I start something new, it's, go balls to the wall, do it all. I'm like, oh, I love craft beer. It's fantastic. I'm going to become a brewer. There's an English school in Niagara. Cool. 2-year waiting list. Nope. So
it's quite difficult. I mean, the thing about it being very trendy there for a while was that, people really did want to be in craft beer. You had a lot of pent up demand, and a lot of the people who went to Niagara College the first 3 or 4 years were sort of not quite middle-aged, but getting on for it. They'd been in careers they didn't like, and they were ready to make a change. And that produced some really good brewers initially. And I think, when you get down to people who are 23 or 4, they don't have enough context to be really good brewers yet, but they can certainly be really good in the brewing industry. You need a certain amount of agency before you can pull it off by yourself.
Now, you mentioned your podcast, the Ontario Craft Beer Guide podcast. Your chemistry with Robin on that show is fantastic, I got to say.
Well, we've been hanging around together for about 6 or 7 years at this point. It's really interesting. I mean, we share basically the same sense of humor. We watched all the same English comedies on YTV growing up. And a lot of it is basically we're just trying to be Rick Mayall and Adrian Edmondson from The Young Ones. Like, we have this thing where we talk about comedy duos, and we can never decide which one of us is the straight man and which one of us is the funny one. And it kind of goes back and forth. It works really well that way. But it does all come from an understanding that we're doing a bit. Like, inevitably, it's not just going to be boring, like news reading or whatever. Yeah. Even when we're interviewing other people, we tend to, work at it pretty hard.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's a great listen. Personally, I only just recently started listening, but I do really very much enjoy it. So it's a fun little throw in between the actual, like, I listen to like the full on crazy comedy podcasts and then movie comedy podcasts. Now it's a beer comedy podcast because
sure,
just sitting at home working all day in the patient support industry, it's like I need to laugh about some stuff, and podcasts are the way to go. So
I find the really weird thing about it is that between the two of us, we're actually extremely knowledgeable about like a wide variety of subjects that almost never come up. I mean, I think as a writer in Ontario, I might be the only person who pays any attention to excise or how the market actually works or legalities, on a continuous basis. So there's all this like subtext and there's all this horsepower under the hood, but mostly people are interested in the horn that goes, plays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the big air horn from a truck or train,
exactly.
So yeah,
very much so.
Fantastic.
It's a clown car. Yeah.
Oh, hey, as long as you're having fun, that's pretty much the creation behind this show, is to have fun, meet new people and beer. The quarantine edition of the episodes were an eventuality where I would be out in Toronto. I would meet Ed and Yoshi and yourself and other, people involved in beer in the area outside of just interviewing breweries. But the pandemic's decided, hey, you're going to stay home for at least a year and talk to people online. So
It's a really weird one, man. Like I've actually gotten to know Ed and Yoshi better since lockdown started. The problem is if you go to a beer festival and you're in my position, you're trying to constantly, mingle and talk to people and network and all that stuff. And it is actually work, despite the fact you end up 6 pints deep at the end of it. So, I'd keep running into Ed and Yoshi at festivals. I never really get to talk to them very much. I think I got to talk to them at the, whatever one was at the CNE grounds last year. And they're great people. I didn't know them terribly well. And I felt bad about that, mostly due to the fact that, you always mean to get to know people, but sometimes it's difficult to do that. So I took some beer down to them, and we had a nice time drinking a very nice beer in a park, which you can do in Toronto now. I mean, in Montreal, it's always been a thing, but now it's,
Do you remember how you discovered craft beer?
Well, it's weird. Like both of the experiences I had were about the same time, and it sort of depends what you mean by craft. I mean, I'm not sure that I believe in craft beer as a thing. At this point, I'm just kind of about the beer industry.
Okay, let's say your first beer out of BMC, like past Bud, Molson Coors. What was your first kind of like a steam whistle? Because since you're in Toronto, I automatically just assume Steam Whistle or Great Lakes because those are your two big ones out there.
Well, it's a reasonable assumption, but it's oddly wrong due to the fact that I didn't spend my formative years in Toronto.
Oh, okay.
I went to high school here, but about halfway through high school, my mom moved to Kingston. And when they did that, I ended up going to the Kingston Brewing Company with them for dinner. And because I was always this size, more or less, nobody carded me. So I got to drink Dragon's Breath Pale Ale at about 17. And that was really different. I mean, I'd probably had Labatt Blue, and Mom had been homebrewing during the early 90s homebrew craze. Not really homebrewing, like the brew on premise stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So they did that. So I was used to Czech Pilsner by 1994. I guess it would have been 14. It's weird. I have the memory of these Midtown Toronto brew pubs that fell out of the market around 1995 or 6, because I remember going there to play pinball. Probably Dragon's Breath Pale Ale. At the same time, in 1996, the Oland Beer Company was like a Labatt branch that dealt with all the Belgian imports that Labatt had. So in Kingston, they have a bar called Monty's currently. It's in the old Speckled Hen in the hotel downtown. And they had the full install, the entire Belgian beer setup. So they had Stella Artois, Lafite Brun, Lafite Blonde, probably Bellevue Creek, Hoegaarden. There might have been one or two others. And, you go in there and you see people serving beer properly in proper glassware, treating it correctly. And that's directly across the street from the brewing company. So there's this little nexus of stuff happening in Kingston. When I got to university in New Brunswick, eventually I settled on Propeller ESB from Halifax because it was the best thing at the local pub. At the campus pub, the best beer was Moosehead Dry, which was $5.50 a pitcher. You would show up during happy hour, you would buy 3 pitchers, and you'd sit there for the rest of the evening drinking Moosehead Dry. Yeah. Sometimes literally. Sometimes they would run out of beer.
Yeah, that was me early on, just going to the bars, and it's oh, here's a coupon for an $8 pitcher on a Thursday. I'm like, okay, my class is done at 2. Time to go start drinking all night. So
pretty much. Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, but what else are you gonna do?
Yep. No, especially going to school downtown Montreal, the options are almost endless. So
I assume based on the vintage you're talking about, the Peel Pub would have been a thing.
Peel Pub, Mad Hatters. My first craft beer that I remember was Brewtopia. Where the new Mad Hatters is, because I went through 4 generations of different Mad Hatters buildings. But then I ended up at Brewtopia one night, and I'm like, hey, this beer has flavor. And somebody's like, here, try this nut brown ale. I'm like, being an immature adult teenager, I'm like, hey, nut brown. Drinking it. I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. So it continued from there. And then we have the Mondial de la Bière here in Quebec, or Montreal, I should say. So that it's an expensive 3 days for me when I go, but it's totally, it's just.
The Mondial, I think I went 2008 through 2010, and it was great. Because you got to see all this different stuff that was just coming into Ontario. I think we had Charlevoix on the market at one point. Fred and Caroline, they're great. And Hopfenstark,
Mm-hmm.
I think, is it Fred there as well? Or the
Yeah,
two Freds?
it's Fred. Yeah, he was one of our early interviews. I think like episode 5 or 6, we interviewed Hopfenstark. So
Yeah, I mean, that dude's a musketeer. He just bounces around. He's great.
yeah. No, it's great. I mean, our craft beer scene has just been expanding like yours in Ontario. I don't, you know, we each had one that made the top 10 list of like the best new breweries, one in Quebec, one in Ontario, that opened during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So
it's not surprising. I mean, like the Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia markets specifically are pretty much getting towards world class. I'm surprised that we don't get a lot more coverage from America, but I'm trying to work on that a little bit.
yeah, well, I heard you mention Brewdog, and if we could get past Brewdog, that'd be great. So,
oh, at one point they were going to open a brew pub in Toronto. I think it was like King Street and River or something, like just over by the Don there. And it wouldn't have had foot traffic. It would have been north of the distillery district. I don't know what the hell they were thinking, but I'm glad they didn't do it because, I mean, what am I going to have to pretend to care about Brewdog?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not wrong if I ever have the chance to go out, because there's usually a big rock and roll festival out there once a year at their soccer stadium, and it's near the Brewdog Hotel. So I'm not going to lie, if I'm going to sleep in a brewery, I'm totally going to do it. So,
oh sure,
yeah.
Like if you want to visit the brewery hotel, that's kind of a fun concept to try out, once. I feel like the novelty might wear off on it.
So you're an author as well. What are some of the books you've written?
Well, when I started from brewing school, I wrote a book called How to Make Your Own Brewskis, the go-to guide for craft brewer enthusiasts. We didn't get to choose the title on that one. I think in England, it's just How to Make Your Own Beer, which is much better. The great thing about that is that I do have a book in the British Library, technically. So I'm quite pleased with that. I wrote that with Mark Murphy from Left Field in Toronto, over by Godspeed, next to where that came from. Let's see. After that, wrote a book with Alan McLeod from Kingston, Ontario, called Ontario Beer. There was a period there where we didn't have a lot of material about the history of brewing in Ontario, so did a lot of research for that. Kind of went a little crazy with it. Had a lot of leftover material about Toronto that didn't fit. And one of the things that happens if you start writing a history book, or if you have anything interesting to say on a blog about history, is people begin to ask the question, didn't there used to be a brewery just over there? And I wrote Lost Breweries of Toronto, basically to ensure that nobody would ask me those questions anymore. Here's your answer, $21.95, please. And then subsequently, what I realized is that, it got nominated for a Heritage Toronto Award. And Toronto Urban Adventures, a local tourism company, based a walking tour on it. And one year they said to me, hey, man, do you want to host this walking tour? And I said, yes, because, money is good. And then basically I ended up telling people where breweries were for a living. So that was kind of an own goal. 2 editions of the Ontario Craft Beer Guide. That's a really weird one. It couldn't work now because you'd need more personnel than we have. It's not a massively profitable book to write because there's travel involved and there's expenses. And I mean, it was sort of break even, but it got us to the point where we were kind of de facto experts about beer in Ontario, which is neat. I mean, it's kind of cool. If you're going to be the town drunk, you might as well choose an entire province.
That's awesome. Do you have any association with the Growler, or are they...
I'm actually the listings editor for the Growler.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, one of the things I do, we had a couple of websites in Ontario that kind of helped keep track of everything. Like they had maps of different breweries in the province. And, both of the guys who did that, they were drummed out of the industry for bad behavior. As happens periodically in an industry where there's alcohol, one of them was abusive to a woman, and the other one was, very racist in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So both of those guys faded away, and I decided that, we can't really allow the industry to fly by the seat of its pants. So I picked up the data using Google Maps and just put it on my website. And eventually what happened is that my data was more accurate than everybody else's data, including like the Craft Brewers Organization and the Ministry of Finance, who are now using my data for some reason. I don't quite understand it. Wish they'd pay me a little money for it, but in the meantime, I think we're keeping the thing afloat.
Yeah, no, I love the Ontario brewery map. I'd love one in Quebec. We have the AMBQ, Association Microbrasseurs du Québec. So we have that, but it's nowhere near up to date as yours is. Like the last time I checked, it was December 2020.
Yeah, December 27th. I just updated the spreadsheet, so I've got to filter it through a couple of things, and then it'll be updated again.
Yeah,
it's not very much work once you got it ready. The hard part is getting all the information in the first place.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I have family in Kitchener and London, so I will be, when I go visit them when it's safe to again, I will be using that for my daily beer tour, or my weekend beer tours, where I'm going to drag my brother-in-law out, my father, who I've gotten into craft beer, and they're going to be like, "Where'd you find this place?" Jordan St. John. So.
Oh, wait until you get to Cambridge, man. There's been like 7 or 8 breweries in Cambridge now.
Yeah, my sister used to live in Cambridge. I was lucky enough to get to Jackass, Great Lakes before it closed. Not Great Lakes, Grand River. I don't know why. Yeah, Grand River before it closed. So I'm thankful I was able to go there.
That's a shame, man, because they had some really lovely English-style beers about a decade ago.
Yeah.
And they got talked out of doing that, and they started making bad, generic craft beer. And it was a sad thing because I really liked the guy who owned it. Bob Hannenberg, he was like 73 or something, and he had his pelvis broken by a horse kicking him. He was a farrier by trade, so he would shoe horses for a living and then go to a craft brewery. A lot of hard work. But, I mean, he basically walked off a broken pelvis. Imagine, shaking hands with him was like shaking hands with a concrete statue.
Oh man, yeah. The last time I was there, they had like some sort of party, but they were trying experimental sours, and like one of them was okay. Their lager though was solid, so I'm like, okay, well if your lager's solid, you're gonna get my money because I love drinking a good lager when I'm in the mood for it. So that's it's unfortunate. And let's see, I've been able to get to Barncat. Renaissance just recently opened, so I haven't been able to go there yet, or I should say, get my family to ship me beer from there, but shipping beer in Quebec is not allowed if you're personal. So,
is it not?
It's kind of frowned upon.
I should probably ship that beer to Pavarnatuck then.
Yeah, but I'm still I've spoken with Earshot from Craft Tap. I don't know if you're aware of their services. They have they ship beer across Canada with the help of breweries.
Okay.
So they're pretty helpful with if I want a BC beer or an Alberta beer, I could just get it shipped to my house. So it's pretty helpful. It's just because of COVID, Canada Post won't be like, here, you have to sign this because you're 18. It's at the post office, go and get it. I'm like, but I have to leave my house and I don't want to.
Yeah, if there's one thing the pandemic has taught us, it's that nobody wants to put on pants.
Yeah. A friend of ours mentioned he bought 14 pairs of jogging pants a couple of weeks ago because he doesn't expect this to end anytime soon. I'm like, September, just be quiet, at least September. So
I have a lot of gym shorts myself.
Yeah. That's awesome. I know you've done a bunch of collabs. Which are some collabs that you've done that you're, you'd like to mention out there?
Well, the most interesting one at the moment is actually sitting, I think, in a fermenter in East York. Muddy York Brewing, they do one based on the Lost Breweries of Toronto book. We had a brewer in the 1830s who kept a really coherent diary. Like, he wrote down a lot of detail, including the make of the measurement tools that he was using. He actually went to London on vacation once and kept writing the diary while he was there. And he talked about going to the manufacturers to see if they had an updated model, so we even know what model he was using. So we were able to recreate based on information about the brewery and the farm around it. Sort of a 9% old ale. So we got that aging in a port barrel, I believe. Should be ready for this Christmas. It was on the CBC last year. It was pretty cool. I mean, anytime a national broadcaster decides that they want to pay attention to you, that's a neat thing. You hit some kind of note. In addition to that, though, I mean, we did one with Amsterdam. It's a recreation bock from 1897 in Toronto. We had Salvador Brewing, and I think there was one of those in Montreal as well. It was actually Reinhardt is the name of the brewery. So the father was in Toronto and he set up his sons in Montreal. And they were, he was a apprentice brewer at Pilsner, having gone to brewing school in Germany. So he probably came over here with a license to brew Pilsner Salvatore in Toronto. So that was like a seasonal beer that they were making. And we knew what malt he was using from advertisements in the newspapers, so we put that together. That was cool. I think the neatest one I ever did from a reputational standpoint, I had been reading at about this time of winter, actually, the Oryx and Crake novels by Margaret Atwood. And I thought to myself, in a post-apocalyptic situation like the one we're in now, what skills do you actually have? Well, I can turn sugar into alcohol. I know how to make beer. And I asked myself at the end of that book, what kind of beer would you make? I mean, you don't have hops. You've got fermentable material. It'd be like a gruit. So I only knew one brewery that made gruit. So I got in touch with Steve Beauchesne at Bose and said, hey, man, do you want to make a gruit with Margaret Atwood? And he said, yeah. Do you have Margaret Atwood? And I was like, no. So I emailed Margaret Atwood's publicist and I said, we'd really like to make a beer based on the Oryx and Crake books. And I kind of explained the situation. And it took about 10 minutes before we got an answer on that one. And she actually did most of the heavy lifting. I think she had to design the recipe. I just made the thing happen. But she was choosing ingredients for a gruit. It was really cool.
Yeah, no, very, very cool sounding. I actually, myself and my friends, we kind of have a monthly get together where we talk beer, BS and stuff. And I said, I asked my friends, one's a salesman, one's an IT guy, one's a video game developer. I'm in, I generally customer service and that kind of stuff. So it's where do you see things going? And mine was, I see old becoming new again. What do you mean? I'm people are going to discover recipes from the 1800s and before, and let's brew this beer. So the fact that I'm hearing this, I'm I feel a little vindicated. So. Somewhat.
I mean, one of the real problems that you have at this point is that everybody's trying to make the killer app IPA. They're just switching out hop varieties and iteratively brewing the same thing over and over again. It's like a Bach fugue or something. You can change it ever so slightly, but it's still just somebody fiddling around on an organ. That's a little bit dismissive of one of the greatest players of all time. But you take the point. You can only pull out so many different stops and combine so many things. I think that, people are looking for variety in terms of flavor. I think that the fruit puree beers are going to prove to be a little bit infantilizing. They're going to get boring over time because you can only drink the blueberry thing so many times before you want a different flavor. That's why they have, different popsicles.
Yeah.
You can only drink the hazy IPA so many times before you get bored of it because the flavors aren't that distinct. So, if you have the ability to sell something that means something, like the sizzle is as important as the actual steak. I think, ooh, this is what this used to be like. Here's the story of this brewery. It's very similar to what we have now, but it's slightly different. That's fun. People like that.
Yeah, no, I'm a variety as a spice of life type of guy. Whenever I go to a brew pub or a brewery, it's if they have a lager, that's the first thing because I know that is a pain to make. That is difficult. If that is good, then the rest should be pretty good or better. So it's that's something I learned. So
I mean, it's true as well. The breweries that I respect the most at this point are the ones who are playing around with lager styles. It's one thing to make an IPA by switching out the hops. It's quite another thing to make a new take on a Keller beer or something, switching in a New World hop or switching in a new Alsatian or German Huel kind of hop. I like that stuff a lot. Amsterdam and Toronto, for whatever reason, they seem to have a real focus on this kind of thing. So they had a brilliant Oktoberfest Marzen and they had a Rauch beer, but they also had I want to say they were using Triskel or something like that, one of those Alsatian hops that's a little bit floral and a little bit spicy. Just really neat. I like when people see ingredients and they don't immediately think of the most obvious thing.
Yeah. It's how many times do you see a Zwickel style? It's.
Well, I mean, exactly. But, if you have people, and this was a problem that we had, we've got a little nascent hops industry. I imagine that there are hop growers in Quebec as well.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I know there are. But, you give hops to a brewer, they think IPA. And you don't have to think IPA. You could think to yourself, ooh, this Sabro hop, which has a little bit of coconut character, that could go really well in a brown ale, or possibly, you could make a tropical stout with that. Or here's a lager that tastes a little bit like coconut. I mean, that's not a great plan, but it could be done.
Yeah, for sure. That's something I'm seeing a lot out of Trillium in the Boston area. Is we had a friend bring back the raspberry gâteau. I'm like, oh, another pastry stout. I'm like, this is the best pastry stout I've ever tasted. So it's it blows my mind what these guys, what really dedicated guys who want to go past the IPAs can do. It really blows my mind when there's time and commitment, and like, this is the beer that's coming out. It's not perfect. Dump it. I play volleyball with a guy who works for Labatt, and he's like, how do these craft beer guys dump a bad batch? I'm like, it's simple. They have to. Because if they release a bad batch, that sullies their name. It's going to possibly ruin them. So,
well, it's certainly true of Trillium. I think if you're in the sort of mid-tier craft brewers, you could probably sneak one through. But I mean, do you get that FOMO for the real big releases in the States? I mean, Trillium, Other Half, like Hill Farmstead.
I don't get FOMO. Would I like to try them? Yeah. Am I going to go out of my way and beg somebody to ship me one? No. I've never tried Pliny, and everybody's like, Pliny is the best IPA out there. And I'm like, I can wait, honestly. So
it's very good, but it wasn't even the best IPA on tap when I had it. Duet, but I don't think you can get that anymore. So you're going to have to take my word for it.
Yeah. As a pro wrestling fan, it's like, oh, Stone Cold Steve Austin came out with a beer. I'm like, okay, I got to try that at some point. And myself and a co-podcaster, we went down to Cleveland to visit another podcaster, ironically enough. And he's like, yo, I got the Stone Cold beer. I'm like, yes. So, and it's a crushable.
Stone Cold El Segundo, bro. Still out here.
Yeah. And, it's a crushable 6.7%. I went down to Jersey before the world shut down last year. I watched some football, and I'm like, oh, let's drink some Stone Cold beer before going and watch Green Bay defeat the Giants. So it's what it is. So
absolutely, man.
Yeah. No, it's great, and I love it. So do you currently homebrew, or have you homebrewed in the past?
I did for a while. I was not great at it. I mean, I think I won a silver medal in one competition, and I kind of gave up because I got friendly with Mike Lackey at Great Lakes in Toronto, and we just started brewing stuff on the pilot system over there. And as that went along, I mean, we did a lot of other contract sort of collab kind of stuff. Not contract, just collabs. I don't think I've ever actually made any money off of beer, which is an important distinction. As a critic, if you were going to be writing for a newspaper, you probably don't want to have a dog in the fight. Like, from an ethical standpoint, it's not great. But a lot of the time lately, what I'm trying to do is like find some kind of charitable angle or something. It doesn't always work out.
Yeah, well, on your most recent episode of your podcast, I completely, the name like blanked because I was reading something for work, but then it's like, oh, this is to support the Indigenous women's community. And I'm like, yes. Oh my God. And our second ever interview was Kahnawake Brewing. Kahnawake is one of the first breweries on native land in Canada. So I'm like, oh, I should tell him about that. And I'm like, it was Red something. I don't remember the name. So what was that called?
It's a good question.
Ugh.
I don't have the press release in front of me.
Okay.
But I think the idea is that it's a red dress.
Okay.
So the concept is that brewers make a red beer of any kind, and they basically donate some of the proceeds to an Indigenous women's charity, and they use the Instagram Indigenous Brew Crew logo for that. Nice logo, really well designed. Mm-hmm. It's good in the sense that things don't change unless you keep constant pressure on them. And like, I think that especially with the disappearance and murders of Indigenous women, it's obviously something that's been going on for a very long time. It almost never gets talked about. So the more light you can put on that, the better. And like, I like the fact that there's no time limit on it. I think it starts March 21st. But I mean, it gives brewers license to play around with something. There aren't a huge number of red styles of beer out there. So there's like, not only does it do good, but it also promotes stylistic diversity, which is something we badly need. Mm-hmm. Saw a brewery the other day with 6 IPAs. Well, now they're going to have a red IPA. So,
Okay, so I know you're in the GTA area. I'm realistic. I've been to Toronto a bunch of times. But let's say I got some friends visiting from, let's say, Cleveland. I have some friends, and they come up to Toronto, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to speak with Jordan, and he's going to give me 5 like best places you could hit. What are like the 5 best places in Toronto you highly suggest?
oh wow! I mean, it's like, how do you go with that? Is that going to be based on reputation? Is it going to be based on ambiance? Is it going to be based on like style?
I say, your favorite beers out of there. Now I know like GLB's Etobicoke, which is a little outside the GTA, but everybody pretty much I speak to out of Toronto says Left Field.
Yeah,
So.
Left Field's great. I mean, in addition to being real good people, I think they announced today that their employees are all getting a living wage. So, that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're at $22.08 an hour, something like that.
That's nice.
They also make really good beer. Like I wrote a book with Mark, so I'm obligated to say Left Field. But it really is like a fantastic choice in the sense that they're usually early adopters for styles, so they got interesting stuff. They had Glorioso Italian Pilsner like a year before the market got Italian Pilsner. And they were double dry hopping stuff pretty early on in the going there. So there's a lot of good beer that they make. EFIS, just the regular brown ale, is great. And the tap room is nice. I mean, it's dogs and babies and stuff. So, very family friendly. When they moved into the neighborhood, there were people across the street saying, oh, no, we can't have a brewery here. It'll bring the property value down.
Yeah.
I mean, between that and Pilot Coffee Roasters, you're basically in hipster heaven at this point. That's another 75,000. So they're great. If you're going to be at Left Field, you have to go to Godspeed. Godspeed is, I mean, Luc Lafontaine, he's a world-class brewer, he really is. He's making the best Czech pale lagers outside of Czechia. So that's a fantastic thing to know. I think Evan Rail, who's a beer writer in the Czech Republic, told me that. And, in addition to that, Luc is very humble, and he's very heartfelt, and he's very passionate about the thing. And the chances that you're going to see him there and actually get to talk to the brewmaster, like that's who he is. He's there every day and he's doing it. And I like that a lot. He once did a beer dinner at George Brown College that we were doing where, the first 3 brewers in the East End, they got up to talk. And I think it was Dave Lee from Eastbound. Might have been Mark from Left Field and a couple other people. And Luc Lafontaine, he goes on last, and he's just found out that he's going to be a father, and he's been drinking a little bit too much for, standing in front of people talking. But he just goes on this talk about how wonderful, it is to see all these people. And I'm just sitting there like, oh God.
He's gonna cry.
So the class I was teaching at the time, a couple of my students had gone to that dinner, and they came in. They were sort of women in their 50s. And they came in the next week and they were just, oh my God, he's wonderful. They were completely in love with him, and it was marvelous to watch. So that's great. I think if I would probably take people where I go most of the time, which is Eastbound Brewing. It's like Queen and Broadview. Dave Lee, who's the brewer there, he's getting really good with Belgian styles. He had a rye saison that was just about as good as any saison style beer that's been produced in Toronto. That was about a couple months ago. And he's got a really good saison called Stone Skipper that he's using mosaic hops in. So you get this tropical saison thing happening. It's really lovely. A lot of his other stuff's great too. Had a good oatmeal coffee stout. He's not reinventing the wheel, but it's all quality. And Tara Lee, his wife, is the chef. And she is the best brew pub chef I've ever seen. Like legitimately, I go there because she has a thing on the menu called Best Beer Snack. And it's like $6. It'll be like whatever she's managed to come up with the scraps in the kitchen. Like, I think Friday is fish and chips, and they save the trimmings from the haddock that they use for fish and chips. And they smoke it in-house, and they make a smoked haddock dip. And you get it with like butter crackers and house-made pickles, and it's like $6 or something. It's fantastic. Goes great with a dry saison, Lovely room, lovely people. Mm-hmm. Everybody who worked there has been there since day one, basically. You never see that. It's great.
Yeah.
I'd talk about the Granite, probably. The Granite Brewery is old school. I think they were like 1989. They're an original Peter Austin, Alan Pugsley, Ringwood yeast, Blood and the Thunder, English old ale brewery. It's I think that they're currently on pitch 1100 of their Ringwood yeast. Yeah, it's impossible. It's unkillable. It shouldn't be permissible. Sorry, I was doing Robert Palmer for some reason. But Mary Beth, who took over from her dad about, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, she's doing great stuff. I mean, she finally got a closed fermenter in there in addition to the open ones that the Ringwood yeast needs. And she's doing really decent New England style IPAs, and she's got like the best English style beers probably in Ontario. And it's a lot of stylistic variation for one person to think about, but she manages really well with it. And the food's good. I mean, they do, curries. It's an English pub, basically. Yeah. I like that a lot. Finally, I guess, like, if there are people from Cleveland, you kind of want to take them to Great Lakes just to screw with them. Because they got one down there, too.
Yeah.
But we get that question a lot from American tourists. It turns out there's like a gentleman's agreement about the copyright. Because I guess the one in Cleveland never thought they were going to make it into Canada anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. Great Lakes is a good brewery, but it's not a great place to visit. They got a little patio outside, like everybody who works there. If I were going to take somewhere into a fifth brewery, I guess it would probably be Reinhard.
Okay.
Reinhard's out in the sort of the stockyards.
Mm-hmm.
The great thing about Reinhard is you're not really visiting one brewery, you're visiting like four.
Yeah.
Because in order to, there's Shacklands, which is like in the same building, and then there's the Junction Brewery, which is next door, and there's People's Pint, which is just down the street there. So there's like four breweries within a little walking distance. You could do an entire afternoon out there, and in fact, I have. So, but Reinhard, they did a couple of really great things. They have a beer called Satanic Panic that's their Imperial Stout. It came with a glass you could special order. It was a 1 pound goblet with like satanic symbols on it. Holds about 11 ounces of beer, as I found out the hard way.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I've recently heard of in the Niagara region, there's Brimstone, which does a lot of like God and devil imagery and stuff. So I'm like, oh, I love like hearing like, rock on, heavy metal. Let's go check these places out. So I know when I went to Reinhard, I tried the Daywalker. So I'm like, ooh, it's about Blade. And I think I brought the Satanic Panic home. I can't remember, but the fact that they made like the monster goblet with, the Enochian, I'm assuming, writing is great to hear.
I love that, but like so much of the stuff they do is really good. They had a triple IPA that I ordered this summer called TV Party, and I don't know how you dealt with the pandemic, but me personally, I periodically drank too much beer. And one day, I had ordered from Reinhard, and I think I got like a 4-pack of their Pilsner and some Daywalker and a couple of cans of a triple IPA called TV Party. And I basically got through the entire order sitting on the balcony. And I didn't realize the TV Party was 10% alcohol. So it kicked my ass very, very severely.
Mm-hmm.
It was like actually having Henry Rollins come in and kick your ass.
Yeah. No, I did that the other last Friday of this recording. It's like, oh, a double IPA. Oh, another double IPA. Oh, a third on double IPA. I'm like, hey, I've had 4 double IPAs, like 400 milliliter cans. I'm like, and it's been 3 hours. I'm drunk. I haven't been this drunk in a while. Fantastic. And just passed out. So.
Yeah, it does a number on your alcohol tolerance, really. I mean, you're sitting indoors, you're not at a bar. Usually if you're at a pub, like you might have a couple of drinks that you're not thinking about because you're talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
But sitting in your apartment, you're probably keeping an eye on how much you drink anyway, so you're drinking less. You are probably at the point where, you might have 3 beers and it'll just, nap time.
Here's a stark comparison because my 40th birthday in 2019 in June, which is great because June in Montreal is like June and July in Montreal is the place to be. And I'm like, okay, 40th birthday, 40 tasters. And it was an all-day event. I started at 2 p.m, and we closed down at Benelux, which is one of the big ones here in Quebec, in Montreal specifically. And it's like, oh, I did 41 tasters. Awesome. I'm buzzed, but I'm not drunk. And the fact that it took me 4 beers a couple of weeks ago to get drunk, I'm like, yeah, I need to get up and move around, or even just playing pool or playing games with friends at a pub. You're probably just putting down like a 5%, let's say ESB or something, a sour. You're not used to just drinking double IPAs because the local place is like, hey, we made these crazy new IPAs, try them. And I'm like, okay, well, we only sell them in 4-packs, so I guess I'll just deal with that. And you drink them, and then you're like, hey, I'm drunk. So,
we only sell them in 4-packs. We have that in home delivery. I mean, you probably have that as well.
No,
of course not.
No, because Quebec kind of sucks for that kind of stuff. So the unfortunate reality when it comes to politics is the political party that wants Quebec to separate from Canada is the only political party that wants home delivery for the microbreweries. I'm love Montreal. I love being Canadian. Quebec. So
do me a favor, wait until they're looking like they're going to vote in a PC prime minister. We'll just go for it.
Yeah. Ontario's like 45 minutes away from me. If I have to, I'll just run across the border. So,
well, one of the I think it was Great Lakes. They have things you can only order 8 cans. Like you can order a flat of beer, but the minimum number of cans of a particular version has to be 8. So it's like, I don't want 8 double IPAs. Like people just send me stuff. Like I've been doing this long enough that beer turns up.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty sure I have beer showing up tomorrow and like later this week. And I think 14 beers showed up last Friday. It's just like a fact of life.
Yeah.
So if I want to try something, I need maybe 2 of them. Like one to try it and then one to photograph, 8. Good Lord. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. It is what it is. I mean, the fact that, Ford stepped up and is like, hey, you guys could do this. And from the rumblings I'm hearing from fellow beer bloggers, Instagrammers, and everybody in Ontario is it's going to be a permanent thing after this.
You can't put that genie back in the bottle. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So I've spoken with a couple of local brewers here, and they're saying that they're going to go up to the Quebec ministry and be like, let us deliver. We're shutting down shop and we're leaving. We're going to Ontario. So.
Well, I mean, if we get some good Quebec breweries over here, that'd be just fine.
Yeah, that would make me sad. Well, sad, but happy at the same time. So, because then I might as well just move out there. So at that point. Okay. I know we're under the pandemic and, I'm not traveling anytime soon because I don't want to be in a cylindrical tube with recycled air for hours on end. But when there's a whole lot less pandemic, what's a beercation you've never been on? Now, I've been adding this caveat where there's 2 options. One where money is very much a factor and one where money is not a factor whatsoever.
Where money, like the budget holiday that I was actually thinking about last year was Mondial. Because I was looking at Airbnbs in Montreal, and I think you can get like a week's stay in a pretty nice place to yourself for about $300. So that's cool. Like I can deal with that. And I haven't been to Montreal in, it's got to be like 2011 maybe was the last time I went to Mondial. So there's got to be a lot of new stuff, and there'd be people I know, and like, just going to Judas Yell and getting a pint of Deus Nocturne is probably a great choice. Like Hopfenstart, Benelux, but I've never been to Unibrew. I've never seen McCausland. At the time that I was traveling over there, we didn't yet have Google Maps on phones. And that has made all the difference in terms of traveling. Like I went to London 2007, 2013, 2018. And like there were pubs I always wanted to go to, but how the hell do you find out where the Bishop's Mitre is in Melbourne or whatever the hell it is? You need a map, and you don't want to be that guy who's walking around with an actual folding city map. You're going to get mugged.
Yep.
Not if you're my size. I walked through Brixton in a Hawaiian shirt. I was fine. but like, you don't want to look like that guy. So last time I got to, because I had Google Maps, I was just walking through London north of the river. I went to the Harp Covent Garden and the Jerusalem Tavern and the Bishop's Mitre and what was it? The Artillery Arms, which is a Fuller's pub over in Islington. And it was wonderful. I mean, I sat there and I had like 4 pints of ESB with Adrian Tierney-Jones, who's just a marvelous raconteur, and he's like a 62-year-old Welsh beer writer. I mean, can you imagine somebody who's basically blagged their entire way through life writing about beer, and who's still somehow upright and moving? It's just staggering. Wonderful day.
Yeah.
I think that in terms of like the expensive one, the thing I want to do is Germany, because my dad gave me a book a couple of years ago, which is the family history, and it turns out that we're not really. I always thought we were kind of French Huguenot because you have the last name Saint John. And it turns out that that is not the case. We're from the Rhineland-Palatinate about 300 years ago, and the last name is Songen. So we're German-Irish-Palatinate. And as soon as you learn that, you're kind of like, well, let's go see the damn thing. Where are we from? And it turns out that we're vine dressers. So, I mean, essentially people who tend vineyards.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And like I looked up the last name, and in the United States, when the German branch of the family moves there, they become maltsters. The Songens who go to Ireland, they have cideries in Limerick. So it's like the alcohol thing is we come by it honestly, So I want to go to Germany, not for Oktoberfest necessarily, but maybe the week after when the hotels are cheaper and the beer is there, But I like the idea. I've actually been learning German on Duolingo. I'm up to about 800 to 900 words vocabulary. And the thing that I loved about it, I was looking at Frankfurt because that's close to the town that our family was from, like a long ass time ago. And I was looking at the little craft breweries that they have in Frankfurt. And it turns out that you can learn all of the craft beer language that you need in another language, because the bullshit stories that we tell ourselves about styles are exactly identical no matter what language they're translated into. So I'm looking at this bottle shop in Frankfurt online. I'm like, why can I read this? I understand all of this. And I realized it's because it's the story about steam beer.
Uh-huh.
In San Francisco and during the gold rush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It was really fun. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I just like the idea that you go somewhere and you spend a couple of weeks and you don't really have a plan. I think that planning is anathema to actually learning stuff. Like if you were to go to Brussels, for example, I was there for a day in 2018. Well, for like 3 or 4 days. You could listen to the cool kids. You could take all the advice online from the beer people about the things that are trendy. I mean, obviously you're going to go to Cantillon, but you don't necessarily have to go to Motor Lambic or whatever. I want to go to the places that used to be cool, like Mort Sabi or I love the Cass, which is a Boone Lambic bar, and just soak in the ambiance. Like it, I'm not necessarily at this point in my career interested in trying the most interesting thing. Like I don't need the fastest roller coaster. The fact that there's a theme park is enough,
No, that's awesome. I don't know what brought it into my mind, but I want to go to South Africa for beer. Now, I know they banned alcohol, unfortunately, during COVID, so a lot of their new breweries are probably going to, unfortunately, close. But from the prices I'm seeing, for $4 Canadian, I could get a flight of 16 beers.
Yeah, I mean, South Africa's an interesting choice. We had Lucy Cook, I think it is. I think that's the last name. I hope I've got it right. She wrote the guide to South African beer, and she was over here because I believe her husband is Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
So they were visiting family, and she was lovely. She brought beer for us to try from South Africa, and I think the interesting hop varieties that they've got would be cool. But I think getting around, I think it's a bigger country than it looks like, kind of like Canada.
Yeah. Yeah,
I didn't realize there were complete prohibition.
Yeah. Alcohol and tobacco alcohol and tobacco are completely banned right now during COVID in South Africa.
tobacco.
Yep. Yep. So
presumably because it's like a lung disease, the COVID.
Yeah, I would assume so, but it's just reading about it, and I'm hearing like some of these guys are adapting, where it's like, oh, they're making hand sanitizer, they're making I can't remember the place. It's in the U.S. I think it's R.S. Taylor. They're in, I want to say Salem, New York, and they're like, oh, they're so they're doing mandals, so man candles and stuff like that. So they're, these guys are trying to adapt and stuff in South Africa by doing stuff that's not really beer. So
the man candle.
Yeah. The mandel, I believe they called it. I can't remember the exact name, but I found it pretty funny. And I'm like, we're trying to get past just the broiness of craft or of beer in general. So,
oh, dude.
Yeah. Not everybody should look like me who makes beer. So,
I'm totally on board with that one.
Yeah,
it's weird. I mean, it's very tribal. The beer, like the uniform. Like you go to cask days in Toronto, and there's a lot of people walking around in like skinny jeans with a black kind of members only jacket, that ball cap, and also a beard. And it's just like, oh, guys, remember when you wanted to be interesting and different, and you got into craft beer for that reason? It's not.
No.
Like I resist the temptation to grow a beard because I'm just like, we don't need more of that. No offense.
No. Well, this only actually started because I won a sports championship. And then a couple of the women I work with are like, oh, you look better with a beard. I'm like, okay, well, since you ladies said so. So.
Yeah, I'm doing a sports playoff thing with the pandemic. Basically, I've been cutting my hair at home for 11 months.
Yeah, I don't have to do much.
I know what to do with the side. I'm good with that. But I don't know what to do with the top, so it's now 11 months long.
No, I shave it every few weeks. Just it's been this way since I was 19, so that's 23 years now. I've been shaving my head. It's just more comfortable, especially during the summer. So.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Oh, I gotta say this is an awesome talk, and I really appreciate you taking time in your schedule today. I honestly have nothing else I have to ask you today. Where do you, outside of like, where do you see the blog, the podcast, writing books? Like, what do you see what's next for yourself in the industry?
I really don't know. I mean, at this point I have a school. I mean, so that's, there's some basic income there, and I'm writing for magazines. Like I'm writing for the LCBO magazine periodically. That's kind of nice. The answer is it's hard to predict. If you would ask me where I was going to be 10 years ago, like if you'd ask me the same question, I know there's no way you could predict this stuff. The idea that you would have an online school that was thinking about going international. Apparently the people who run the program at George Brown are happy enough with it that they're thinking about offering the courses internationally. And that's just, first of all, don't tell me that 10 minutes before we're going to start filming for the day. That's a lot of pressure, isn't it? No big whoop. This is going to be live in front of a million people.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going to go cry in that corner right there.
I did actually go and hit my head on a thing. Yeah. It was pretty rough. Like Goldberg, just knocking himself out beforehand. But I couldn't have predicted that was going to happen. You couldn't predict that I'd be writing for the LCBO or that I'd be the editor for like the listings editor for a magazine. I mean, basically my attitude to this is you can't really plan because the variables involved are so weird. If there's one thing that this has taught me, it is that, there's no such thing as ignoble work. And a lot of the other people who write about beer for a living or, pretend to write about beer for a living, nobody actually makes a living writing about beer. That's not a thing. I think there's one guy in Canada who does it. It's probably Stephen Beaumont. He's got like an international market, and he's got a book that's internationally sold. If you can break America, you're probably okay. But in Canada, like writing for magazines at this point is, you need other gigs. So, I tend to revel in the fact that I can do all these different things. One of the things I like doing, like periodically I do just a real basic labor gig job where we're setting up weddings and stuff in an event space. And it's satisfying because you move these things to just over there and you set them up the way they want them. And, you know, at the end of the day, you've accomplished something. If you write like a blog about beer, you can put it on the website and you can never hear anything about it from anybody, and you'll never know whether it did anything at all. The idea that you can move a molecule, you know, from here to here in chair form, that's at least something. You had an impact on the universe that day. So it can be quite satisfying that way. But I also, you know, I tend to like to do government work when it's possible. Like, I think I'm probably going to try and manage a census district this year if they'll have me. You know, if there's one other thing that this has taught me, it's that good data results in better outcomes. So, like, you know, the fact that I have a map on the website means that I'm now the listings editor for a magazine. That's how that works. You show up and you see what happens.
Yeah, that's great. And just you saying you're data minded, I'm the same way where, you know, numbers, I'm about numbers. My job is literally paying pharmacies for very expensive medication that patients can't afford. I send pharmacies, well, I don't personally, but I make sure the pharmacies get paid. So that's, you know, and I'm very data minded, very, you know, I believe more in science than I do religion. That's my choice, obviously. Religion is a huge factor for most people when it comes to stuff, but beer is science. And I believe in this right now. So it's
absolutely. But the really cool thing about beer, and it's something that we're coming around to probably at the end of COVID, you know, we're not going to have as many bars. A lot of them aren't going to survive. Mm-hmm. It's a sad truth, but it's truth. And, you know, as I was researching the historical information for the beer course I teach, I learned about this great tradition, the Klosterschenk, German language. But, I mean, the idea is very simple. You know, the early patron saints of brewing in Europe, they're people like Arnulf and Arnold, and they're from Ireland. And they bring with them this tradition of hospitality. The idea being that, you know, maybe you convert people to Christianity, but it's a lot easier to do that if they show up because they know there's going to be beer. I mean, you know, I don't know. I watch people like the Indigenous brew crew and Ren Navarro work at the market, and they're very earnest and they're very good at what they do, and they're doing important work. But I think that, you know, a lot of this hinges on getting people slightly tipsy first and then talking them into it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, you change, yes, but probably easier once you've lubricated them a touch.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned bars closing now. I read in your article that you believe the beer store. So the beer stores in Ontario, for those who don't know, are pretty much government-run alcohol sales, beer sales specifically. Okay.
It's weird. I have to completely explain this from scratch about twice a year. So don't feel bad. This is just what I do for. The beer store is it's founded in 1927, more or less. It's a brewers cooperative originally, so it's a really good idea. At the time you get through Prohibition in Ontario, you guys had Prohibition in Quebec, but it lasted for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We had 11 years of Prohibition, and by the time you got to the end of it, there were like, you know, 20 regional brewers left, maybe 15. And they all kind of got together in a warehousing bid so that you could buy beer across the province. And they had stores added to that eventually. And the problem is that through consolidation over time, you know, all those breweries get bought up by E.P. Taylor or maybe Molson or Labatt or whatever. And by 1989, you're down to Molson, Labatt, and Carling, which is owned by an Australian company. And eventually that folds into Molson. So the beer store is like a co-op that's owned by 2 breweries. Okay. So it's nothing to do with the government, which is really weird. But it's massively beneficial to them in the sense that they're in control of logistics. They have refrigerated shipping. Mm-hmm. They've got 452 stores at last count. But the thing is, like, as the craft brewing movement continues to grow, they're less and less relevant. People don't like drinking beer out of bottles. They like cans. So that packaging shift is happening. Obviously, the beer store is not doing what it's meant to do. It was, when it started, a really good idea. And if you could create a co-op of breweries that everybody owned a small piece of, I mean, eventually you'd get it consolidated again. It's just what would happen. without like real stringent bylaws. But, you know, it's not up to the task in its current format. You can't, in order to be on shelves there, you have to buy in. I think it's, I don't know how much it is for the entire chain, but the initial purchase might be a couple $1,000s for each brand. And that's prohibitive for a small brewery. I mean, it's real. They changed it a while back so that they get like 7 free listings in the stores closest to them. But that doesn't really help people because, you know, they don't make as much money if you're not selling directly at the front door. Yeah. So, you know, over time, what's ended up happening is the beer store is less and less successful. In 2015, in Ontario, they had a thing called the Master Framework Agreement. And the idea is that beer is now going to be allowed in 450 grocery stores. How did they come up with 450 as a number? Well, it's the same number as there are beer stores. So it's a shot across the bow right from the beginning. It's the Ontario government basically telling the beer store they got about a decade to get their stuff together. And they're going to have to spend $100 million on fixing up the beer store locations so they no longer smell like 1970s pub.
Yeah.
You know, so they did that, but in order to do it, like, they've had to sell off capital. So some of the land that they owned and some of the buildings that they owned got sold. And that means they're having to lease locations, which means that the operating costs of the beer store continue to increase over time. So it's becoming less and less profitable for Molson and Labatt. And my feeling is that at some point, there's a tipping point where it's no longer as good a deal as just selling beer through grocery and convenience stores. And I don't know where that is. But I've always looked at 2025 as the year that kind of kicks in. And there are chains from Alberta that are looking into maybe being in Ontario. I know that they're actually advising Doug Ford on policy, which is a real bad sign. Currently, we got like little tiny bottle shops as a sort of loophole for the pandemic. And they're doing really well. I mean, they got the ability to curate product, which is something we've never had before. Like the LCBO, they do a very good job in the sense that they're trying to make it equitable and bring more people to market. But, you know, they're not really allowed to choose a huge number of products from each brewer. So the things that you want are not necessarily going to be on shelves. So the idea of independent bottle shops is great. We're kind of pushing that. And I think that speeds up the beer store's decline because, you know, once that's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in.
Yeah.
Especially with home delivery, especially with mail. At some point, probably before the next provincial election, they're going to have to address that. When they do, fireworks.
Yeah. So as a Quebecer, you know, we do have bottle shops, thankfully. My closest beer store is a hop, skip, and a jump. It's like a 30-minute walk. You mentioned McCausland when you visit Montreal. That is literally a 45-minute walk from my house. One of the biggest patio. I keep saying terrace because I'm a Quebecer. One of the biggest terraces in Quebec. It's like a football field. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So when you hit there, but what mainly Quebecers do, especially those who live close to Ontario, so let's say Montreal, maybe a little bit of the eastern townships, we go over onto Ontario because we don't have deposits for wine, hard liquor, and even some beer bottles, beer cans don't have like a deposit. So I just return them there. Do you think that beer stores will just kind of focus as like a return exchange place, or will they just kind of completely die out?
You're worried about the 10 cents a can.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, one of the issues that you have is with the cost of living being what it is in Toronto and with people living in condominiums, you know, you've seen the shift in packaging over the years between bottles and cans in the beer store. I think at this point, especially given the fact that the beer store was closed down for 2 months for bottle return in April and May. You know, the bottles are looking less and less attractive to the big guys. Molson, they put together a aluminum can processing plant in Colorado. I think they're up to 750 million units a year. So it's going to be more cans. They're probably going to get to like 80 cans, 20 bottles. Not too long from now, 2 years maybe. And at that point, I mean, the recycle deposit program that we have, I don't know what happens to it. if it's not, I mean, the industry standard bottles, the screw tops, 341 mil, they are usable like 15, 16 times, I think. So if you're not using those anymore and there's no reason to have the bottle float out there existing so that the big brewers can use it, do they care about the recycling? If they don't care about the recycling, maybe that's the tipping point. I don't know. With the cans, I mean, yes, you do pay a deposit on them, but the cost of living in Toronto is so high that the 10 cents a can doesn't even matter to anybody. They just kind of put them in the recycling in the building. I know that I separate mine out and I leave them in a tray because the super of the building has explained to me that there is a guy who comes around and collects them. And if you separate out the ones with the deposit, the guy will take them away and make some money off them.
Yeah, that's nice to hear. I know they're called the Southern Ontario Beer Boys. I don't know if you've dealt with them before.
Not offhand, no.
Okay, so they do a bunch of charitable foundation, and they actually do can collection. So, for the first 2-3 months, it was like, we're not collecting, but leave your cans in your garages or your storage area, whatever, and we'll come and get them. So, and these guys return them, and then they donate money to the, I want to say, McMaster's Children's Hospital.
Yep.
So
that's a real good one. There's also an organization called Cans for Change, who are just sassing on Instagram. They're basically in support of like Black students at Durham College. They're sort of in the Oshawa, Durham region. And I like that as well. I mean, the idea that you can take this deposit money and do something useful with it, that's good. But I mean, I kind of wonder what happens, if you get rid of the beer store version of it and you have a publicly owned one, maybe something that the government puts into place. Maybe you have a privately owned one. Probably they jack up the deposit, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, well, I know our tall cans here are 20 cents in Quebec. Yep. Small cans are 5 cents. Bottles are a variety because they're called Emporium. They're pretty new too. They had like a real fancy engraved bottle, and it was like a $2 deposit. So, but me personally, I just return them because I'm like, I'm going to buy more beer. I do like what the Southern Ontario Beer Boys are doing, so I am trying to start my own conglomeration with All Beer Inside and some friends where we're going to start collecting and returning and donating money and starting things for charities as well ourselves, because we're at that age where maybe it's time to do that kind of stuff instead of just selfishly drinking and returning it for my own financial needs. So,
well, sure. I mean, one of the problems I have is that I have nowhere to store stuff.
Yeah. I
end up getting sent beer for review purposes. So you're drinking like 4 ounces sometimes and pouring out the rest of the bottle. And then there's like 3 other bottles that you have to do something with. So, I wouldn't, I should probably call these people more frequently now that I think about it.
Yeah. Also, property in Montreal is a whole lot cheaper than it is in Toronto right now. So that's one thing.
Periodically, I look at 1-bedroom apartments in Montreal and think to myself, man, I really should have paid attention in French class.
I'm not 100% bilingual. I'm bilingual enough to get along with my job, thankfully. So, but when I do go out, because it is Montreal and it is very bilingual, I can go to a bottle shop or a brewery and be like, okay, it's those today. Okay, here's what it costs, because they know, like, especially downtown Montreal when it's good for people to visit, a lot of people speak English here. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I always found it really, I tell the American tourists on the walking tour, if you're an American and you speak English, don't even bother trying to speak French. They'll think you're wasting their time.
Yeah. Well, I've been told that Quebecers who try and speak French in Paris are told to speak English, but that's what I've heard. So.
Well, I figure if you roll up to somebody in Montreal talking like this and you say, excuse me, you tell me the way to do this, they'll probably, okay.
Fantastic. Awesome. I said before, and then I apparently lied, I actually do have nothing else to ask you today. Once again, really appreciate your time. I've already told you when this is coming out, so let the people know if anything's coming up or where they can find you.
Well, the George Brown beer courses are online. I think for the most part, they are Ontario specific just for now, while we try to figure out what the hell we're going to do for online international beers choices. That odd problem to have. especially during a pandemic. That's my life. So constantly thinking about what English breweries might export where. Just a very tired man drinking heavily.
Awesome. The website, your Instagram or Twitter or anything like that too?
Oh, the Instagram is jordan.stjohn, and the Twitter is saints_gambit. I really liked Leslie Charteris novels when I was younger. That's why. And the blog is stjohnswort.ca. Not enough pictures. Going to try and work on putting in more pictures.
Sounds good. So we're going to add all that in the show notes. As for us, it's at All Beer Inside everywhere. Allbeerinside.com is the website. We're having a problem with it right now. You could go there, but you can't click on the links. It's really, really weird. YouTube channel is allbeerinside.com. If you like this episode, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Episodes come out every Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time. And as I say at the end of all episodes, drink craft, not crap. Awesome. Thank you very much once again. I really appreciate you taking your time today.
Hey, no problem.